No, Felix, things will not get better for me. Sometimes I feel like I'm no longer in the world, but I'm drifting around in some limbo. These were the words that Franz Kafka said to his friend Felix Welch on one September day of 1913. No, they weren't said on the phone. I don't know why I did that. It was a letter. This quote highlights one of the most important features of Kafka's works, his unique vision of what space and place are. Limbo, to which he refers in the letter, is a place according to Catholic Christianity somewhere between heaven and hell, where the souls are stranded either because they haven't been baptized or because they had been born before the birth of Jesus Christ. Therefore, limbo is a space on the border between other spaces. It is a space of uncertainty and disorder. It is a space where, unlike in hell, hope is present, but its presence is very distant and unsure. And it is precisely the space where Franz Kafka's works are set, on the border between two spaces, with the final inability to reach either of them. One variation of this indefinite space of limbo is shown in Kafka's parable Before the Law, also included in his novel The Trial. The parable is about a man who comes to a doorkeeper guarding the entrance to the law with a capital letter. The doorkeeper says that just now he can't allow the man in, but he might be allowed in sometime in the future. The man tries to peek behind the doorkeeper and see what's inside, but the doorkeeper laughs and says, "If you're so tempted, why don't you try to go in, even though I have forbidden it? But remember, I am powerful, and I am only the lowest doorkeeper. Outside each room you will pass through, there is a doorkeeper, each one more powerful than the last. The sight of just the third is too much even for me." That warning calmed the man down, and he decided to sit down by the door and wait until he was allowed to enter. Thus passed a year, 2 years, then a decade, until the man was about to pass away. Before that, however, he only wanted to ask one last thing that he'd never in his lifetime managed to ask the doorkeeper. He asks, "Everybody seeks the law, so how is it that in all these years no one apart from me has asked to be let in?" The doorkeeper answered, "No one else could be granted entry here because this entrance was intended for you alone. I shall now go and shut it." Now, let's look close into the relationship between the man and the law. Although we might pity the man because he was never allowed to enter the law, he was actually never promised that this entry would be allowed. All the doorkeeper said was that it was possible that the man be allowed, but he never made any promises, so it shouldn't surprise us that the possibility never came to life. But what's interesting is that the man decided to stay by the door and wait for as long as he could. From the very beginning, it was his own conscious choice to be waiting. At any time whatever, he could have just got up and gone away, but for some reason he never did. This reminds me of Albert Camus' reflection on Kafka's philosophy, where he said that if Kafka wants to express the absurd, he will make use of consistency. You know the story of the crazy man who was fishing in a bathtub. A doctor with ideas as to psychiatric treatments asked him if they were biting, to which he received the harsh reply, "Of course not, you fool, since this is a bathtub." Kafka's world is in truth an indescribable universe in which man allows himself the tormenting luxury of fishing in a bathtub, knowing that nothing can come of it. Similar to the crazy fisherman, the man from Kafka's parable is also engaging in an essentially masochistic activity. With each year he should be more and more certain that he will never get access to the law, and yet he stays waiting. One other key to the interpretation of this novel is Jewish mysticism and Hasidic Judaism. Kafka, being a Jew himself and living in a city with a very strong Jewish tradition, was very much influenced by Judaism. In particular, God, from the point of view of Judaism, just as from the point of view of Kafka, is not a very kind being. He is strict and sometimes even cruel. Martin Buber, for example, shares this Hasidic tale in one of his books. A man who was afflicted with a terrible disease complained to Rabbi Israel that his suffering interfered with his learning and praying. The rabbi put his hand on his shoulder and said, "How do you know, friend, what is more pleasing to God, your studying or your suffering?" In the same way, when we think about Kafka's parable, perhaps we are mistaken that the man needed to enter the law. Perhaps it was God's wish that he stay outside. One more thing in this parable that strikes a chord with Jewish mysticism is the structure of the law itself as a physical space. The doorkeeper describes the law as a sequence of rooms where before each door there is a more powerful doorkeeper than in the previous room. This almost exactly matches what is described in the esoteric Jewish literature called Hekkalot. According to it, the mystic who wishes to experience God is supposed to pass through a number of chambers or palaces one by one, and in the last, that is the seventh chamber, there arises the throne of divine glory. Some of the related texts also mention that passing from each room to the next one involves a number of trials, and that the doors are also guarded by doorkeepers, just like in Kafka's parable. The reason for the existence of such a complicated process is that in Jewish mystical traditions, unlike in mainstream Christianity, God is not available to help anyone who wants to be helped. It's the other way around. God is hidden and can only be experienced through a long process of numerous mystical techniques. The idea of the hidden God represented as a metaphor is also present in Kafka's The Castle. In this novel, the main character K arrives at a village. However, in this village there is nothing to be seen of the castle this novel is all about. The castle doesn't even seem to be there. This is what we are told in the very first paragraph. There was nothing to be seen of Castle Mount, for mist and darkness surrounded it, and not the faintest glimmer of light showed where the great castle lay. Kay stood on the wooden bridge leading from the road to the village for a long time, looking up at what seemed to be a void. This changes, however, after the narrator has some sleep at the inn, which is also the time when the most strange things begin to happen. Overall, the state of dreaming is extremely important in Kafka's fiction. His three most famous works, that is, The Castle, The Trial, and The Metamorphosis, all start with the main character waking up, but we are never sure that the character really did wake up because of all the surreality described afterwards, like the labyrinths of bureaucracy in The Trial, the transformation of a man into an insect in The Metamorphosis, or the hierarchies of power in The Castle. Kafka himself wrote on the importance of the moment when you wake up in an afterwards deleted passage from The Trial. He said, "It is really remarkable that when you wake up in the morning, you nearly always find everything in exactly the same place as the evening before. For when asleep and dreaming, you are, apparently at least, in an essentially different state from that of wakefulness, and therefore, as that man truly said, it requires enormous presence of mind, or rather quickness of wit, when opening your eyes to seize hold, as it were, of everything in the room at exactly the same place where you had let it go on the previous evening. That was why, he said, the moment of waking up was the riskiest moment of the day. Once that was well over without deflecting you from your orbit, you could take heart of grace for the rest of the day." So apparently Kafka's novels are exactly about the case when you wake up in the wrong way, and when the world that surrounds you is completely different from the one that you left before sleep. One more aspect of this dreamlike state is that because the main character is kind of located in a dream, he never even puts the logic of this dreamed world into question. To Gregor Samsa and his family, it seems perfectly natural that a man can turn into a bug overnight, and to the characters of The Trial, getting arrested and never knowing the reason for it is just part of how law operates. In all of these cases, sleeping and dreaming is a way to enter a completely different mode of being, which actually allows the character to experience something that they can't experience in real life when they are awake. So it's no wonder that Kay from The Castle starts seeing the castle only after sleeping at the inn. It's because the castle only exists in the dream from which Kay cannot awaken. And this also means that the rules that apply to the castle and the village are the rules of a dream as well. These rules have a lot to do with how physical space operates, because in a dream, physics starts to gradually break down. Let's take one episode from the novel where Kay tries to reach the castle. He walks a path that seems to lead straight to it, but then he realizes that the straight path is not straight at all, and the closer he gets to the castle, the harder it gets to reach the castle. So he walked on, but it was a long way, for he was in the main street of the village, and it did not lead to Castle Mount, but merely passed close to it before turning aside, as if on purpose, and although it moved no further away from the castle, it came no closer either. Kate kept thinking that the road must finally bring him to the castle, and if only because of that expectation he went on. Because of his weariness he naturally shrank from leaving the road, and he was surprised by the extent of the village, which seemed as if it would never end. Umberto Eco had a great explanation for why space works so weirdly in Kafka's novels. But in Kafka's story we must accept that we are moving in a non-Euclidean world, mobile and elastic, as if we were living on an immense piece of chewing gum. The non-Euclidean world Eco refers to is essentially a world that works by the rules of geometry other than the rules that we experience as humans living on the planet Earth. For example, a line that seems straight may not actually be straight, and vice versa. A curve that you see with your own eyes may actually be a straight line. You can see this in action with how light travels near black holes. Although it looks like light rays are moving in a circle, they are actually following a straight line, but in a space that is warped by the gravity of the black hole. Or let's take a look at this simulation of different kinds of spaces where we start off in a normal Euclidean space in which straight lines are always straight, the parallel lines never cross, etc. But then when we enter a non-Euclidean space, things begin to change. If we try to reach the end of the space, we'll never manage to do that because as we are moving, the space is also warping, so that the lines that at first appeared straight become curves, and the curves become straight lines. Space in Kafka's The Castle works in a very similar way. Every road that seems to lead straight to the castle actually goes around in a circle and manages neither to reach the castle nor get away from it. If you forgive my liking for geometrical metaphors, the movement of K towards the castle can also be described as an asymptoty, that is, a curve that gets infinitely close to a line but never quite manages to cross the line. The first person who hinted at this was Jorge Luis Borges, who in one of his essays wrote that the first Kafkaesque thing in human culture was Zeno's paradox of Achilles and the tortoise, according to which the great warrior Achilles would never be able to reach a tortoise because by the time he gets to the position of the tortoise has already moved a bit further, and then if he tries to catch up with it once again, then it will have moved a bit further still, and so on to infinity. Achilles is bound to never catch up with the tortoise because the closer he gets to it, the slower time flows. This essentially works in the same way as the asymptoty does, with one entity never getting the chance to reach another entity, however hard it tries. So it seems that according to this comparison of Kafka's novels and Zeno's paradox, the essential feature of the Kafkaesque is infinity. The infinity of the road that leads a person to the hidden God, the infinity of the hierarchies of power, the infinity of the search for meaning. But perhaps what Kafka is actually trying to say is that the point is not in finding the ultimate meaning, the point is in understanding the inability to find it, and therefore what you need isn't following the path, but keeping away from it and getting lost, so that you never get into the trap of infinitely circling roads that pretend like they lead you somewhere.